The early morning sun painted Cedar Glenn in soft hues, casting long shadows across the front yard of Henry Thompson's modest home. At 85 years old, Henry moved with deliberate care, his steps steady but cautious, supported by a wooden cane. His daughter, Clara, had insisted he use it after a minor fall last winter. The cane was more for her peace of mind than his, but Henry, a former Navy officer, had long learned to accommodate others' concerns. Every morning, rain or shine, Henry upheld a personal tradition he had kept since moving to this small town in 1950. He began the day by raising the American flag in his front yard, a quiet homage to the friends he lost during World War II. With arthritic fingers, he worked the rope methodically, hoisting the stars and stripes until it fluttered proudly against the brightening sky. Neighbors often paused to admire the veteran in his neatly pressed navy cardigan, khaki pants, and polished brown shoes, a habit he maintained from his service days. On this particular Monday, Henry planned to spend time in his cherished garden. His roses, Evelyn's favorite flowers, demanded attention. Nurturing them gave him purpose, a sense of life's continuity since Evelyn's passing 7 years ago. As he adjusted his gloves, patched but still serviceable, a gift from Evelyn on their 40th anniversary, he heard a cheerful voice. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," called Lucy, the bright-eyed 12-year-old next door, as she sped past on her bike. Henry smiled and waved, her youthful energy a comforting reminder of life's joys. Lucy had helped him plant tulip bulbs last fall, and seeing them bloom each spring brought Henry a quiet delight. The neighborhood children affectionately called him Grandpa Henry, despite his lack of grandchildren. Clara and her husband hadn't been able to have children, but Henry found a family in his neighbors and the community he'd nurtured for decades. Later that evening, Henry sat in his favorite armchair by the window, sipping tea and admiring his neatly tended garden. The flag outside danced gently in the twilight breeze, and he felt a moment of peace. But the tranquility of Cedar Glen was about to be shattered. The following morning, Henry was pruning his roses when a distant rumble caught his attention. 5 motorcycles roared past his house, disrupting the calm. He watched with unease as the bikers circled back, parking in front of the abandoned warehouse across the street. Over the next hour, more motorcycles arrived, until nearly 24 bikers had gathered. The warehouse had been an eyesore since the furniture factory closed 3 years ago, its windows boarded and walls defaced with graffiti. Now it seemed the bikers had claimed it. Their black leather vests bore the emblem of a red viper, coiled and menacing. The leader, a towering man with a bald head, thick beard, and a snake tattoo curling up his neck, barked orders as they broke the locks on the warehouse doors. Henry's neighbor, Mrs. Lynn, hurried past with her small dog, her face a mask of fear. Henry's heart sank. This was no place for fear. Cedar Glen had always been a refuge, a place of community and safety. That night, the serenity of the neighborhood was obliterated by blaring music, the roar of engines, and the clinking of bottles. The next morning, Henry found himself cleaning up the debris strewn across his lawn. His neighbor, Martin, approached, picking up an empty beer can. "Called the police last night," Martin said, shaking his head. "They said they can't act unless someone files a formal complaint." As days passed, the bikers became increasingly brazen. They tore across Henry's lawn, leaving tracks in the grass. When Henry raised the flag, as he did every morning, a biker revved his engine and jeered, "Nice flag, old man." Henry remained stoic, but inside, a storm. When the bikers hung a banner with their Viper emblem over the warehouse entrance, Henry decided he had seen enough. One afternoon, while repairing the tire tracks on his lawn, the gang's leader approached. Flanked by 2 lackeys, he sneered, "You'd better get used to us, old man. This is our turf now." Henry straightened, his grip tightening on his cane. "This is a neighborhood, not a playground for hooligans," he replied, his voice steady despite the provocation. The leader smirked and spat on Henry's walkway. "Watch yourself, Grandpa." That night, as Henry sat alone in the dark, the noise from the warehouse louder than ever, he gazed at a faded photo on the wall. It showed a young sailor in crisp navy whites, standing proudly with his comrades. Memories of battles fought, comrades lost, and resilience forged stirred something deep within him. It was time to act. The next morning, Henry retrieved an old leather wallet from his drawer. Inside was a dog-eared military card, a relic from his service days. Scribbled on the back was a phone number he hadn't dialed in decades. His hands trembled slightly as he punched the numbers into the rotary phone. "Hello?" came a gruff voice. "This is Henry Thompson," he said, his voice firm. "Navy, Pacific Theater, 1943 to 1945. Service number 749321. I need help." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "Hold on, sailor." Minutes later, another voice came on the line, older but commanding. "Henry Thompson, you're the real deal. Say no more, we'll be there." 2 hours later, the unmistakable growl of motorcycles filled the air. Henry stepped onto his porch and saw a convoy of Harley-Davidsons rolling into Cedar Glen. These bikers were different. They wore leather vests adorned with American flags and military insignia, their presence exuding authority. The leader, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair tied in a braid, dismounted and approached Henry. "Captain Eleanor Carter, Air Force retired," she introduced herself, saluting him. "We heard you needed reinforcements." Henry nodded, a rare smile breaking across his face. "It's good to see you, Captain." The veteran bikers, a coalition of former military personnel from all branches, formed a formidable line in front of the warehouse. Eleanor addressed the Red Vipers. "You've disrespected this community and this veteran. Clean up your mess, apologize, and leave. Now." The gang leader sneered, but the sight of nearly 30 veterans standing united, their military experience evident in their demeanor, gave him pause. When one of the veterans pulled out a phone and started recording, the leader's bravado faltered. By the end of the day, the Red Vipers had fled, their banner torn down, their litter cleaned up. The veterans stayed, helping repair the warehouse and transforming it into a community center. Cedar Glen began to heal. The next morning, Henry raised the flag once more, this time surrounded by friends, old and new. Cedar Glen had reclaimed its peace, and Henry, though still grieving Evelyn, found solace in the bonds of community and the unyielding strength of those who served. Henry gazed at the restored warehouse from his porch, a sense of pride filling him. The veterans had not only driven out the gang, but also united the neighborhood. The flag fluttered in the morning breeze, a symbol of resilience and justice. Yet, deep down, Henry knew that peace was fragile. The Red Vipers might be gone, but their departure had stirred something within Cedar Glen. As the days turned into weeks, the community center began to take shape. The veterans organized cleanup drives, enlisted volunteers, and turned the once abandoned building into a haven for the neighborhood. Henry, though initially hesitant to step into a leadership role, found himself at the heart of it all. His stories of service inspired the younger volunteers, and his steady presence reassured the older residents. "You're old enough to remember." One afternoon, as Henry was trimming his roses, Clara approached, a worried look on her face. "Dad, I got a call from the mayor's office," she said, handing him a letter. "They're planning to redevelop this area. The warehouse might be torn down." Henry unfolded the letter carefully, his heart sinking as he read the details. A corporate developer had purchased several properties in Cedar Glen and intended to build a sprawling commercial plaza. The warehouse, now a beacon of hope, was marked for demolition. "This can't happen," Henry muttered, his voice firm. "This isn't just a building anymore. It's our community's heart." Clara nodded. "I agree, Dad, but they're pushing this through quickly. We need to act fast if we're going to stop it." Henry sat in silence for a moment, his mind racing. The Red Vipers had been a visible threat, easy to confront. This, however, was a battle of paperwork, politics, and power. But if war had taught him anything, it was that battles were won through strategy and unity. That evening, Henry called a meeting at the community center. Veterans, neighbors, and local leaders gathered, their faces a mix of concern and determination. Captain Eleanor Carter, who had become a fixture in the neighborhood, stood by Henry's side as he addressed the crowd. This center stands for more than bricks and mortar, Henry began. It represents what we can achieve when we come together. We can't let anyone take that away. Eleanor stepped forward. We'll need signatures, allies, and media attention. If they think they can bulldoze over us, they're wrong. The room erupted into applause. Teams were formed to collect signatures for a petition, while others worked on crafting a compelling narrative to share with local journalists. Clara, leveraging her connections in city planning, unearthed documents suggesting the developers hadn't followed proper procedures, giving the community a potential legal foothold. As momentum built, a surprising ally emerged. Lucy, the spirited girl from next door, had been quietly recording video clips of the community center's transformation. With her parents' help, she edited a heartfelt video highlighting the center's impact on Cedar Glen. The video went viral, garnering attention from activists and local news outlets. One evening, as Henry reviewed the growing stack of petitions, a knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a young man in his late 20s, his posture tense but respectful. "Mr. Thompson?" the man asked, his voice steady but hesitant. "I'm David. I was part of the Red Vipers. I came to apologize." Henry's grip tightened on the doorframe, memories of the gang's terror flashing through his mind. But as he looked into David's eyes, he saw something unexpected. Regret. "I didn't want to be part of it," David continued, his words spilling out in a rush. "I was in over my head, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. When you and the veterans stood up to us, it opened my eyes. I left the gang. I've been trying to make things right. Henry regarded him for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in." Dave explained how he had grown up in a rough neighborhood, joining the gang out of desperation. He expressed a desire to help the community center and repair the damage he had been complicit in. Though skeptical at first, Henry decided to give him a chance, assigning him to the clean. David's involvement sparked mixed reactions. Some residents were wary, while others saw it as a testament to the center's ability to transform lives. Over time, David proved his sincerity, working tirelessly alongside the volunteers, and even organizing a youth program to mentor at-risk teens. As the fight against the redevelopment plans escalated, the developers retaliated with aggressive tactics. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood spreading misinformation about the community center. Anonymous letters arrived at Henry's home, warning him to back off. One evening, a brick was thrown through the center's window, a chilling reminder that their struggle was far from over. Henry, however, refused to be intimidated. "We've faced worse," he told the volunteers. "They think they can scare us, but they underestimate the strength of a united community." The turning point came during a town hall meeting where the developers presented their proposal. Henry, dressed in his navy blazer adorned with service medals, stood to speak. His voice, though aged, carried the weight of experience and conviction. "And this community has faced bullies before," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "We didn't back down then, and we won't back down now. Cedar Glen is more than a place. It's a legacy. And legacies aren't for sale." His words were met with thunderous applause. Eleanor and Clara presented the petition, bolstered by evidence of the developers' procedural violations. The council, swayed by the overwhelming support for the community center, voted to delay the redevelopment plans pending further review. In the weeks that followed, the energy in Cedar Glen was electric. The community center held events to celebrate the victory, from potlucks to talent shows. Henry, once a solitary figure tending his garden, found himself at the center of a vibrant, revitalized neighborhood. One evening, as the sun set over Cedar Glen, Henry stood on his porch, watching the children play near the warehouse, turned center. Lucy waved from her bike, her laughter echoing in the air. David approached, holding a freshly painted sign that read, "Cedar Glen Community Center, a place for all." "We did it," Clara said, joining Henry on the porch. He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "We did." And it wasn't just about saving a building. It was about proving that when people come together, there's nothing they can't achieve. As the flag fluttered gently in the evening breeze, Henry felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Cedar Glen had not only reclaimed its peace, but had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, unity could turn the tide. A week after the town council meeting, life in Cedar Glen had settled into a rhythm of cautious optimism. The community center buzzed with activity. Children's laughter filled the air as they attended art classes, senior residents gathered for book clubs, and local musicians performed on weekends. Henry Thompson watched it all unfold from a bench near the newly planted garden outside the center. Yet, beneath the surface of joy, a nagging feeling lingered. This victory might only be temporary. Henry's concern grew when Clara rushed into his house one morning, her face pale. "Dad, we've got a problem," she said, holding up a thick envelope. "The developers filed an appeal. They're claiming our petition doesn't have legal standing." Henry frowned, taking the envelope from her. "An appeal?" he murmured. "They don't give up easily, do they?" "No, they don't," Clara replied. "And if we're not careful, they might win this round." Henry knew they needed a stronger strategy. He called an emergency meeting at the community center, inviting everyone who had been part of the initial fight. Eleanor Carter, ever the strategist, brought a map of the area and a file of potential allies they hadn't yet approached. "They're trying to outlast us," Eleanor said, pointing at the map. "But we have something they don't. This community. We need to bring in more voices, more people who will fight for this place." It was during this meeting that David, the former gang member, raised his hand hesitantly. "There's something I haven't told you," he began, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of their collective gaze. "I know a few people in the city council, people who owe the Red Vipers favors. If the developers are pulling strings, it might be through them." The room fell silent. Henry studied David, searching for any sign of deceit, but there was none, only a genuine desire to help. "We'll take all the information we can get," Henry finally said. "But tread carefully. We don't want to stoop to their level." David nodded, his resolve clear. Over the next few days, he worked quietly, reaching out to his old contacts and gathering whispers of insider deals and backroom negotiations. What he uncovered was worse than anyone had anticipated. Not only had the developers been lobbying the council, but they had also promised lucrative contracts to several members if the redevelopment went through. And armed with this information, Eleanor and Clara reached out to a journalist who had been following the story. The resulting expose sent shockwaves through the town. The headline read, "Developers' dirty deals expose, Cedar Glen fights back." Public outcry grew, and pressure mounted on the council to take action. The developers, cornered and desperate, resorted to intimidation. One night, Henry awoke to the sound of footsteps outside his house. He grabbed a flashlight and opened the door cautiously, only to find a menacing message spray-painted across his porch. "Back off." Instead of fear, a familiar determination surged within him. The next morning, Henry called a press conference on the steps of the community center. Reporters and residents gathered as he stood in front of the freshly painted sign that David had made. "I fought for this country because I believed in justice, fairness, and the strength of community," Henry said, his voice steady despite the tension. "If they think they can scare us into silence, they've underestimated us. Cedar Glen stands together." His words galvanized the town. People who had remained on the sidelines now stepped forward to lend their support. A retired judge offered pro bono legal assistance, while a local business owner donated funds to cover campaign costs. The fight for Cedar Glen had become a rallying cry for preserving small-town values in the face of corporate greed. The developers, sensing the tide turning against them, tried to pivot. They sent a polished representative to Cedar Glen, a man in an expensive suit named Victor Crane. He held a town hall meeting, claiming the redevelopment would bring jobs and prosperity. But the residents, armed with facts and passion, weren't swayed. When Victor claimed the community center was a relic of the past, Lucy, the 12-year-old neighbor, stood up. "The center isn't just a building," she said, her voice ringing out. "It's where I learned to paint. It's where my friends and I feel safe. You can't put a price on that." The room erupted in applause, and Victor's composed facade cracked for a brief moment. He left Cedar Glen that evening, his plans in tatters. As the legal battle dragged on, Henry received a surprise visitor one quiet afternoon. A young woman in her 30s knocked on his door, holding a small, leather-bound notebook. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Maria Hernandez. My grandfather served with you during the war." Henry's eyes widened. "Miguel Hernandez?" She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "He spoke of you often. When I saw your story in the news, I knew I had to come. My grandfather passed away last year, but he left this for you." She handed him the notebook, its pages filled with faded ink. Inside were letters Miguel had written during the war, describing Henry's bravery and kindness. Henry's hands trembled as he read, memories flooding back. Miguel had been one of his closest friends, and seeing his words after so many years felt like a gift. "Thank you," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." Maria stayed for tea, sharing stories of her grandfather and offering to help with the community center. Her arrival felt like a reminder that the bonds forged in the past could still impact the present. In the end, a fight for Cedar Glen culminated in a final town council meeting. The developers, unable to shake the community's resolve, withdrew their plans. The council voted unanimously to designate the community center as a protected landmark, ensuring its place in Cedar Glen's future. That evening, the neighborhood gathered for a celebration at the center. Strings of lights illuminated the garden, and music filled the air. Henry, standing beneath the flagpole, watched as children played, neighbors laughed, and new friendships formed. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. As the night wore on, Eleanor approached him with a knowing smile. "You did it, Henry." "No," he replied, his gaze sweeping across the joyful crowd. "We did it." Cedar Glen had not only survived but had thrived, proving that even the smallest communities could stand tall in the face of adversity. And at its heart was an 85-year-old man with a wooden cane, a garden of roses, and an unyielding belief in the power of unity. Henry Thompson sat on his porch the morning after the celebration, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the crisp air. The sun rose slowly, casting golden hues across Cedar Glen. It was peaceful, but Henry's thoughts drifted toward what lay ahead. The fight for the community center had been won, but it had also awakened something deeper in the neighborhood. A realization of how fragile their peace had been, but one that made the neighborhood secure. As Henry sipped his coffee, he noticed a car pulling into his driveway. Out stepped a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The man approached with a cautious smile. "Mr. Thompson?" the man asked. "Yes," Henry replied, standing slowly, his cane in hand. "My name is Andrew Grayson. I'm a historian and journalist," the man said, extending a hand. "I've been following the story of Cedar Glen and the community center. I was hoping I could interview you for a book I'm writing about veterans who've continued to serve their communities." Henry hesitated. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but something in Andrew's demeanor was genuine. "All right," Henry said, gesturing toward a chair on the porch. "Have a seat." Over the next hour, Henry recounted his journey from his Navy days in the Pacific Theater to the quiet life he built in Cedar Glen, and finally to the recent battle to save the community center. Andrew listened intently, scribbling notes and occasionally asking thoughtful questions. "You've done something remarkable here," Andrew said as they wrapped up. "It's rare to see this level of community solidarity these days. I think your story could inspire others." Henry shrugged modestly. "I just did what I thought was right." As Andrew drove away, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of his story. Cedar Glen had become a symbol, and symbols had a way of drawing attention, both good and bad. A month later, the first signs of new trouble appeared. Clara burst into Henry's house, holding a flyer she'd found taped to the community center door. It was an announcement for a rally organized by a group calling themselves the Urban Advancement Coalition. On the surface, their mission seemed benign, promoting urban development and revitalization. But a quick online search revealed that they were heavily funded by corporate developers, including the same group that had tried to demolish the community center. "They're not giving up," Clara said, frustration etched across her face. "This is their way of keeping the pressure on." Henry frowned, reading the flyer carefully. "They'll try to turn public opinion against us," he said. "We need to stay vigilant." That evening, Henry called a meeting with the core group of volunteers and veterans. Eleanor Carter, always ready with a plan, suggested a counter-rally to showcase the positive impact of the community center. "We need to remind people why this place matters," Eleanor said. "If they're trying to sway public opinion, we'll meet them head-on." The days leading up to the rallies were a whirlwind of preparation. Lucy and her friends created posters, while David organized a team to distribute pamphlets highlighting the center's programs. Maria Hernandez volunteered to coordinate media outreach, using her grandfather's legacy as a powerful narrative of community and service. On the day of the rallies, the streets of Cedar Glen were alive with activity. The Urban Advancement Coalition had set up a polished stage near the town square, complete with speakers and banners. Their representatives spoke about economic growth and job creation, but their words felt hollow to those who had witnessed the transformation of the community center. Just a few blocks away, the counter-rally was in full swing. It was less polished, but far more heartfelt. Residents shared personal stories of how the center had changed their lives. A single mother tearfully described how the after-school programs had given her children a safe place to learn and play. An elderly couple spoke of the friendships they had forged through the center's events. And Henry stood off to the side, watching the crowd with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He had always preferred action over words, but he knew the power of a well-timed speech. At Eleanor's urging, he stepped onto the makeshift stage. "Good afternoon, everyone," Henry began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I'm not a politician or a businessman. I'm just a neighbor, a veteran who's seen what happens when communities are torn apart." He paused, scanning the crowd. "This center isn't just a building, it's a lifeline. It's where people come together, where we support each other, where we find hope. We've fought too hard to let that be taken away." The crowd erupted into cheers, their enthusiasm carrying through the streets. Even some onlookers who had initially attended the other rally began to wander over, drawn by the authenticity of the community's message. But as the day wore on, tensions began to simmer. A group of agitators from the Urban Advancement Coalition, frustrated by the growing support for the counter-rally, began to heckle the speakers. When one of them shoved a volunteer distributing pamphlets, the situation threatened to escalate. Henry, despite his age, stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Enough," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is not how we resolve our differences." The agitators hesitated, then backed down, their bravado faltering under Henry's stern gaze. Police officers arrived shortly after, dispersing the crowd before things could spiral further. In the weeks that followed, the community center became a beacon of activity. Inspired by the rallies, new volunteers poured in, bringing fresh energy and ideas. The garden outside the center expanded, now featuring a small memorial dedicated to veterans and community leaders who had contributed to Cedar Glen's legacy. Henry, though humbled by the attention, began to embrace his role as a mentor. He spent hours sharing his knowledge with younger residents, teaching them not just about gardening, but about resilience and responsibility. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry received a package in the mail. Inside was a framed photo of the Cedar Glen community standing together in front of the center, signed by dozens of residents with messages of gratitude. "Thank you for showing us what it means to stand tall," one message read. As Henry hung the photo on his wall, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The fight for Cedar Glen had brought challenges, but it had also forged unbreakable bonds. The neighborhood had not only survived, but had thrived, proving that even in the face of relentless pressure, a united community could stand as a bulwark against adversity. And as Henry looked out at the garden, its roses blooming brightly, he knew that the seeds of hope he had planted, both in the soil and in the hearts of Cedar Glen's residents, would continue to grow for generations to come. As the days turned into weeks, the renewed energy within Cedar Glen showed no signs of waning. The community center became a bustling hub, filled with activities for every age group. Yet, for all the progress, Henry Thompson couldn't shake a subtle tension that had settled over the town like an unspoken question. What comes next? One afternoon, Henry sat with Captain Eleanor Carter in the community center's newly refurbished office. The space, once a dusty storage room, was now the nerve center for all activities. Folders filled with plans for upcoming events lined the shelves, and a corkboard displayed photos from the rallies, news clippings, and hand-drawn thank you cards from children. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "We've done something remarkable here, Henry," she said, "but there's more work to be done. I've been thinking. We need to ensure the long-term future of this place. What if we established a foundation?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "A foundation?" "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Something formal. It would allow us to secure funding, attract donors, and expand our programs. We can't rely on rallies and goodwill forever." The idea made sense. Henry nodded slowly. "You're right, but setting something like that up, it'll take resources and connections we don't have." Eleanor smiled slyly. "That's where my old contacts come in. You're not the only one with a history, you know." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor began reaching out to her network of retired military personnel, many of whom had transitioned into influential roles in business and philanthropy. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Letters of support poured in, along with pledges of financial assistance. A retired Marine Corps general even offered to host a fundraising gala, an event that promised to elevate Cedar Glen's profile far beyond its borders. While Eleanor worked on the foundation, Henry found himself drawn into a different battle, this time a personal one. David, the former gang member who had become an integral part of the community, approached him one evening with a troubled expression. "Mr. Thompson," David began hesitantly, "I need to talk to you about something." Henry set down his pruning shears and gestured for David to sit on the garden bench. "What's on your mind?" David hesitated, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It's about the Red Vipers. Some of the guys who left the gang with me, they're struggling. They want to turn their lives around, but it's not easy. Doors keep closing on them because of their past." Henry listened carefully, his heart heavy with understanding. He had seen firsthand how difficult it could be for people to rebuild their lives after making mistakes. "What do you think they need?" he asked. "A chance," David said simply. "A job, someone to believe in them. They're willing to work hard, but nobody will hire." Henry thought for a moment before standing and walking toward the community center. "Let's see what we can do," he said. Over the next few days, Henry and David met with local business owners, advocating for second chances. It wasn't easy. Many were hesitant, fearful of the risks. But Henry's reputation and David's sincerity gradually began to sway opinions. The community center started a pilot program, offering vocational training and job placement services for individuals seeking a fresh start. The program faced its share of challenges. Not everyone succeeded, and there were setbacks that tested Henry's patience and resolve. But for every failure, there were moments of triumph. Like when a young man named Carlos, who had once been on the fringes of gang activity, landed a job as a mechanic and tearfully thanked Henry for believing in him. As winter approached, Cedar Glen prepared for its first ever holiday festival at the community center. The event, dubbed the Festival of Lights, was designed to bring the entire town together in celebration of their unity and resilience. Volunteers worked tirelessly to string lights around the building, set up booths, and organize performances. Lucy, the 12-year-old girl who had been a constant source of energy and creativity, approached Henry with an idea. "What if we put together a time capsule?" she suggested. "Something to show future generations what we've done here." Henry smiled, touched by her thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea, Lucy. Let's make it happen." The community embraced the project enthusiastically. Residents contributed letters, photographs, and small mementos that captured the spirit of Cedar Glen. Henry added a pair of his old gardening gloves and a handwritten note that read, "To those who come after us, Remember that a community's strength lies in its people. Never forget to stand together. The festival was a resounding success. Children's laughter echoed through the air as they played games and marveled at the twinkling lights. Local musicians performed carols, and the scent of warm cider filled the night. Henry stood near the time capsule, watching as residents placed their items inside, each contribution a testament to the journey they had shared. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor approached him with a glass of cider in hand. "You know," she said, her tone light but serious, "if you ever get tired of roses, you've got a knack for this leadership thing." Henry chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm too old for all that." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Too old? Henry, you just took on developers, gang remnants, and half the town council. And won. Age has nothing to do with it." Henry smiled, her words sinking in. For so long he had seen himself as just one man tending a quiet garden. Now he realized that his garden had grown far beyond his backyard. Enjoyed this story? Watch the next video for another great one, and be sure to subscribe for more exciting tales.